What do you do day to day?
So I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer for the bank, and as I think about my role, it's kind of split into two things. So it's looking after data and analytics projects. So how do we help each one of the business lines and corporate functions within the bank best use data and analytics to support their businesses? And so that includes a lot of use cases, that includes a lot of automation, but that's one component of the job, and that's what keeps us in business, because if people don't see the benefit from data and analytics, it's very easy for people to get disenchanted and start to lose interest. But the other component is equally important, which is enabling data and analytics across the enterprise. So the transformational aspect of it is really important, and that includes data platforms, that includes data governance and management, making sure that we're keeping up with data ethics, a lot of things that help all of the people within the organization use data and analytics better. And so when I think about the way that we've used data and analytics in the past, there's two ways to think about it. One is it provides insight so that it allows you to make better business decisions, and we've been doing that since the beginning of time. Every organization is a data-driven organization. It's just how good is your data and how easy is it for you to access it. But then the second component is what we're talking about today, which is data and analytics actually operating your business. And that transformation is actually pretty large. It touches everything from people, process, and technology. And so that's those I would see as the two big things that I do with my day.
It sounds like it keeps you pretty busy.
Oh, yeah.
So what are some things, in we're taking this as a case study, right? So I want to break down how this all works for you. What are some things in your day-to-day that have to go right for all of those things that you just described to go to plan?
Yeah, so AI and analytics have been around, as I mentioned, a long time. Even AI itself has been around since the 1930s. So it's not a new concept, but we still don't feel it in our day-to-day. We've gone through a variety of AI winters where people funded it, got disenchanted, stopped funding it, and then we started the cycle all over again. And I think many organizations, including my own, have gone through this cycle of, let's do it. We acknowledge that it's important, but we haven't gotten it to actually change the way that we live our lives or our customers experience us. The last time you went to the DMV, the last time you went to a bank branch, I'm pretty sure you didn't feel that different. You didn't feel AI in that experience. But AI exists. And so I think when I think about what needs to go right in my day for me to feel like I've done my job, is that it has to integrate into business process. We've talked a lot about the partnership between business and IT. The same relationship needs to happen between business, IT, and data and analytics. If they don't feel it, it didn't happen. If it's really, really smart, if the model's great, it's still a brain in a jar, really smart brain in a jar, but it's still contained by that jar itself. So until it's actually hit a process, it's hit technology, it's kind of like it doesn't exist, is what I share with my team. The only thing that has to go right is that it's integrated into business process. If it's a logistic regression or if it's AI, it kind of doesn't matter. No matter how sophisticated it is, it needs to work.
You brought up the banking center example, so I would love to kind of unpack that with you. So as you're working with a banking customer, what are some ways that AI is interacting with them? How are you guys putting it to work for them?
Yeah, excuse me. So I actually think AI is probably one of the biggest thrusts of our customer experience of evolution over time. So Scotiabank is a very international bank. We have over 20 million customers worldwide. And especially when we have large events that actually hit globally, pandemic is one, inflation, recession, that's happening to all 20 or so million of our customers at the same time. And our entire value proposition is around great advice. How are we going to execute on great advice to 20 million customers at exactly the same time, experiencing the same stressful moment, and being able to do so in a way that's even remotely personalized? AI and analytics has to be at the heart of that. We can't get the scale to be able to do really great work for all of our customers, no matter how affluent they are, or no matter how important, or no matter how large. This means that we leave no customer behind, which is really important to me. But also it allows us to ensure that we're delivering on our value proposition for everyone.
It's interesting, you're bringing up kind of the same point that the last panel was as well, about using AI to actually allow you to become more personable. And how are you using that? And how are you thinking at Scotiabank about what does it mean to have a competitive differentiator in this space? Knowing that other people are going to be adopting automation and AI, like where do you think that you get the competitive advantage?
So, I mean, competitive advantage is difficult because the space is moving so quickly. But it's not going to happen on technology because so much of this space is open source. So much of it, all of us are dealing with the same labor challenges, all the same kind of legacy technology issues. So I really think that the benefit and the differentiation comes from the same place it always came from our employees, from our customers, from listening, from human empathy. And that's, I think, the entire thesis behind automation and what's going to be left after we automate the stuff that's not important. It's the competitive differentiation, and that comes in the form of people.
And how are you thinking about that internally as you're using AI within your own company or to communicate with your own employees? How do you think about that differentiation between what's personal and what's automated, and using the best combination of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, we say AI and we typically mean artificial intelligence. I'm pretty sure everyone in this room has heard augmented intelligence or assisted intelligence. And I think, over time, especially as we think about the differentiation, whether it be for our customers or for our employees, it really does have to be things that actually allow the human to be in the loop, for them to engage, to improve, to add to the data, to add to the intelligence that goes into this machine. Very similar to training up humans. We also want the machine to get better and better over time. And that happens through interaction, whether it be machine to machine, human to human, human to machine. There's lots of ways that we can continue to make even the artificial brain smarter by continuing to imbue it with either the genius of a human or the pattern recognition of a machine. So, when we think about how we are embedding it into process for our employees, we talked about this before. It's how do you make their lives easier, for sure. But then as I think about the transformation that we're all going through, and again, very, very tight labor markets and a lot of turnover, how do we actually get to a point where that's no longer as structural a constraint as it currently is? So how do we use, we have lots of folks who speak to our customers, whether they be in branches or in contact centers. They turn over at an alarming pace. And the ability to get to a differential customer experience, time to proficiency is at least 9 months, if not longer, given current methods. If we can use automation, if we can make it so that they're focusing on those parts of the job that are actually differential, if we can give them coaching in the moment, if we can do any of the things that automation, AI, et cetera, allow us to do, suddenly that 9 months turns into 6, turns into 3, and we have a fundamentally different curve for labor, just as an organization, forgetting about, of course, the employee experience of not having to manage 100 different products on the shelf, having to understand all of the policies and procedures behind each one of them. It's a really hard job, and if we can make it easier, and if this is the way to do it, I'm happy to help.
Do you think that that's going to be helpful also just in retaining talent and getting people to stay around longer?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I've met with some of our frontline staff, whether they be in the contact centers or the branches. I've spoken to employees even in head office that really struggle, with the workload and the complexity that we keep adding with regulations, with new experiences, with new products, with new services. As we get more and more digital, we spend a lot of time in front of the glass because we've been so customer focused, which is great. But we always forget the behind the glass component of it. So the hamster wheels that have to go on to ensure that the customer experience is excellent means that our employees, they take on most of the burden, whether it be in our processing centers or in our front line. I can imagine the level of stress that they've been under, having to do that remotely, impossible, and yet they've done it. But I think people are getting weary, understandably. So again, if we can help to make their lives easier, if we can help to understand how complex we're making their jobs, and then do the hard work to automate it and to fix the process or fix the operating model so that it accommodates these things a bit more effectively. Again, I think it's nothing but upside from an employee experience perspective and ultimately for the performance of our businesses.
Another thing another thing we've done a bunch of reporting on is as employees are deciding whether they want to stay with companies and how they're feeling about them, they're thinking a lot more about the sustainability efforts, or they're thinking about the D&I policies of the organization. So Are there any ways you all are thinking about using AI or automation to help with, DE&I, for example, and how are you bringing that to life?
Yeah, certainly. I think, look, there's so much bias in our experience over the last couple of decades. I think we've all lived that. And analytics and data is in the business of looking at our history and predicting our future. So I think, as I think about our data ethics program, or I think about some of the things that we've been doing to embed a little bit more objectivity into some of these decisions, we also have to think about how biased the data itself is. So, one of the things that we do is, or one of the ways that most organizations think about combating this is making sure that you have a workforce that represents the customer base that you serve, which is very, very diverse. We're in many different countries, 6 predominantly. And all of them represent entirely different experiences, different customer bases, different cultures, different skill bases, different technology contexts. And by having them well represented within our teams, all kinds of diversity, whether it be visible diversity or experiential diversity or skill diversity, all of that is very important to ensuring that when we are building these systems or when we are building out processes or when we're thinking about our customer or our employee, we have a range of folks around the table that are providing their opinion and debating, hopefully debating. If you're not debating, then there's no real diversity in the room. But I think that's actually helped us to think about our processes differently. And whether it's in embedding AI into our HR processes or embedding AI into the way that we support our customers, we can do all of those things, but without having the right workforce to question the way that we're applying it. The DE&I efforts or the sustainability efforts or whatever agenda we're trying to ensure makes it into our work doesn't really happen.
We have a question from the audience I'd like to take. If deep learning and other technologies further progress, will emotional experiences also be automated? If so, how long do you think this will take? What do you think, Grace?
Well, you know what? I think just as with everything else that we talked about today, components of it can be. And so certainly when we think about some of the AI capabilities that are resident in the contact center now, you can actually automate, hey, what is the sentiment that this customer is coming in with? And you might get it right some of the time. You'll probably get it wrong most of the time. But acting on that kind of signal still is very human. And I know that there are lots of different ways that we'll continue to progress on deep learning and making more and more real kind of human experiences, robots, et cetera. But I think, for me personally, the only true emotion I felt at a bot is anger. And then the rest, if it's a great experience, I know it's been automated in some way, and it doesn't feel as special. So I think, emotional connection is it's very rare, it's very nuanced. I think we're a long way from that.
Yeah, and very cultural, I think, as you mentioned that too. If you're working in different countries, you're dealing with a whole different set of cultures and emotions and experiences that you want to layer onto that as well,
yeah.
Which I can only imagine is harder to do in an automated way. Yeah. I hate to bring up COVID one more time, but I feel like I have to because I do think it changed a lot of the way that people were interacting with their banks as well, both companies but also just consumers. So how are you thinking about automation in this kind of post-COVID, not that COVID's over, but in following those big changes that we've experienced over the last 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, COVID for all of its disruption was really a great catalyst for change. I think it's very easy for us to say later on things that are difficult. Sending your entire workforce home, we never would have thought about doing that. And now, just imagine, one, that we survived that, and two, it's allowed for a completely different employee experience. So the customer experience, the digitization we've talked about, I'm sure, ad nauseum, but I'd really love to shine a spotlight on what it's meant for parents, what it's meant for our employees, what it's meant for people who have, elderly parents who are struggling. I certainly had my own experience during COVID. If I hadn't been able to work remotely, it would have been it was already a painful experience. It would have been much more painful. So I think giving people flexibility and giving people agency over their lives and their careers in a different way is one of the best legacies of COVID. But certainly, we would not have been forced to do that for our employees, our customers, our businesses, had we not had that catalyst. But maybe the next time we need a big transformation, we shouldn't have a pandemic. We can try a different way.
I agree. I think that's a good call, Grace. What are some examples of ways that you all at Scotiabank have changed as a result of these years of working remotely and the pressures of the pandemic?
Yeah, so I think in all of those same ways, I'm sure all of your organizations have changed. So, we've digitized a lot more. We've gotten a lot more ruthless about the prioritization of what we focus on. And a lot of what we do now is much more at scale. You can't just say, okay, well, we're going to send a list to the branch and they're just going to go through and tick all of these calls. You actually have to make it a lot more systemic when everybody is digital, when the customer is digital and when the employee is digital. So there's a lot more that we've done to actually invest in our infrastructure to ensure that we're ready for whatever the next big disruption is going to be. Certainly in the way that we interact with our customers, there's a lot more that's happening in all of our channels. We are still very much committed to our branch network, and we actually were one of the few banks that kept our branch network open during the pandemic. However, we recognize that there's the multi-channel, omni-channel, whatever we call it these days, is still very much a part of the way that customers want to interact with us. So we've been a lot more thoughtful about what that journey is and can be, and certainly customers have changed alongside organizations to make that much more possible. And then, as I mentioned before, we're still hybrid, and we're still allowing our employees that level of flexibility to work where and how they'd like. We're mindful about what makes a lot more sense to be done in person, and certainly we've given teams the choice to do so, and they've taken us up on it. But it does make working for the bank in a time that's still very much in flux, I think a much more positive one. So again, all of these legacies I think will be sustained and hopefully very helpful going forward.
And how are you thinking about how automation helps the bank scale?
Automation is scale at the end of the day. So I think, as much as we can possibly do to automate as much of the process that, again, is either broken or is fixed but is still manual, I think is very important. One of the things that is probably standing in our way is, again, if I look at the two ways that data and analytics has been applied or can be applied, data doesn't have to be perfect, data doesn't have to be fast. When it's made for strategic decision making, you can apply the Pareto principle. You can deal with a little bit of difficulty in accessing that data and friction. When you automate, it needs to be perfect, it needs to be fast, and you need to feel very comfortable that the decisions that are being made now, before it might be 10 decisions, it's 1,000 decisions that are following this rule. You got to feel really comfortable about that. So I think that's enabled us to really look at the process, really look at the ethical consequences of the decisions that we're making around data, and ensuring that we feel really, really, really good about that decision. And then, automation from there, once you've liberated the data, once you have it on the right platforms, it becomes a lot easier to do. But that wholesale automation across the entire organization, as you guys would all know, is very difficult. So choosing the right use cases, which I heard before, making sure that you feel very, very comfortable around the decision, liberating the data, and then putting it into operations. That's created a ton of scale for us. And one of the best examples of that is, our footprint's very wide. We have a global data and AI platform. And that means that a modeler in Canada or a modeler in Bogota or a modeler in Chile can equally add to this library of different models that we have for our customer base. So it's not strictly speaking automation, but our ability to scale is enabled through technology.
You mentioned ethics, and so I want to hear more about how are you taking pains and thinking about using AI in an ethical way?
So we have I'm very proud of our data ethics team, and we have a dedicated data ethics team that reports directly to me. A lot of what we've been hearing around the space, and I know everybody understands how important it is how do we ensure that we are not, if our business is transformation, we should not be in the business of perpetuating biases that exist in our data. So we should be asking the right questions. We should be thinking about, how are we using this data? What are we using it for? not only is our modeling process right, but how are we thinking about data from a usage perspective? I know a lot of people are thinking about monetizing data. There's open banking that's coming our way. So there's lots of ethical considerations that need to be taken into account. The reason why I'm so proud of our team is because we publish standards for sure, and I know that many have, but operationalizing data ethics is impossible. Because you actually have to sit in front of every model. You have to sit in front of every decision around data and ask those questions. And our team has actually operationalized it. I think it comes down to the structure of the team within the bank, where data, analytics, and technology all sit together. So we have the makers and the consumers in the same team. So we can actually force the issue for people to actually put into their modeling process. Are we doing the right thing? We have a governance process around it. We have a tool that is AI-based to ask some of those questions of the models as they're being built. So to me, walking the talk on this has been a labor of love, but something that I think is really important for us all to do.
Fantastic. Grace, thank you so much for joining me for this case study.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.